Israel has taken on almost with a messianic zeal this idea that it had to wipe out Hamas.
South China Sea and the trouble in that area because of the Chinese aggression and the clash between China and Philippines.
This is a story of India's own profile in that part of the world rising. A broader Iran-Israel conflict can be devastating, of course, for the region. A Trumpian idea of what American foreign policy should look like. Taking a step back and trying to argue that, look, Ukraine is not a vital interest of the US. The Russians are advancing on multiple fronts, and Russia, of course, has very strong capacity to continue to fight this war. President Monsoon making more of conciliatory statements in the past few weeks where he had said about, for example, economic aid, etc., realizing that he would need India.
Absolutely. That's a really interesting point that you made there. Hello and welcome. I'm Naghma. You're watching the Ideas Factory. Ideas Factory is the program where we discuss and analyze all the important events happening around the world and its impact and what does it mean for India. Joining me is Professor Harsh Pant. Harsh, this is a time when the world is looking at two major wars in two different parts of the world. There is the Ukraine war that refuses to subside, and then there is the Iran-Israel war, which was earlier the Gaza conflict, but the war probably has moved to a direct conflict between Iran and Israel. So when we look at these two wars, there are no signs of the war de-escalating or subsiding or getting over. In Iran, Israel, it was all about the Gaza conflict. Now, when we look at it, it's always a tit for tat, Iran attacking Israel, Israel responding. One says that this is a response of the other person's attack. But this goes on. And now we've also heard that the Israeli military head has resigned over not being able to prevent the Hamas attack on October 7th. This is probably the first big resignation that we are seeing. At the same time, Iran has issued a warning that if Israel responds any further or attacks again, then it should be prepared for a very harsh response. Hezbollah continues its attacks on Israeli military establishments, townships. Is this war more about a direct Iran-Israel conflict, or is it now again getting into the proxy war, which was always there? Hezbollah and Israeli attacks were always going on. How do you see this now and the impact that it would have on the countries around? We already see Syria, Lebanon, all these countries involved. And very interestingly, when Iran attacked Israel, the response that we saw from Jordan and Saudi Arabia. So how many sympathizers do we see in that region for Iran?
Hi, Naghma. I think, certainly we are still in that phase where the old equilibrium is no longer exists both globally and I think in different parts of the world. And when we talk of two wars in two different parts of the world, one in Eurasia and Europe, one in Middle East, I think we are looking at again regional, balances breaking down, and that regional deterrence frameworks no longer applicable in today's world as they have been crafted decades back. So I think all across you are seeing this fragmentation, and therefore the use of force is perhaps becoming much more commonplace than we had anticipated, say, a few decades or a few years back. And in particular, when you see what is happening in the Middle East, I think the old deterrence framework no longer applies, and the post the Hamas attack on Israel, Israel has taken on almost with a messianic zeal this idea that it had to wipe out Hamas, but it has morphed into a war that I don't think Israeli policymakers are now able to control. They have lost. They seems to have lost control of how of what is the political end game here that they are aiming to achieve. It's not entirely evident what the strategic end game for Israel is going to be. It seems that for Mr. Netanyahu, clearly it is about remaining in power, but all else in terms of the war gaming, in terms of the war aims, it's very, very unclear as to in which direction Israel wants to go, because I think events are driving the war more than perhaps the main stakeholders. So, as you said, initially what started off as a Gaza conflict is now a much more broader, and it was widely anticipated that it would, if Israel continues in this direction, it would, one day be a wider conflagration, and it seems to have happened with Israel targeting. The Iranian embassy, and then Iranians reacting, and deeming that as a sovereign territory, and therefore reacting and showering missiles on Israel. So I think on both sides there are domestic pressures, there are strategic pressures to respond, and the morphing of the Gaza Israel Hamas conflict into an Israel Iran conflict is of course worrisome from global perspective, but from regional perspective, if you see the old, I think, battle lines have once again been drawn. You have Israel and its proxies on one side, and you have Israel with the tacit support of the Arab world on the other. And I think therefore, when you have Jordan, allowing Israel to use its airspace, when you have Saudi and UAE helping with intelligence, there is a wider, a regional equation that comes into play. And is Iran using its proxies and now upping the ante with its proxies like Hezbollah's attacks on Israel? I think all those issues have become have made the region once again a tinderbox, and this fear that a broader Iran-Israel conflict can be devastating, of course, for the region, but I think also for the wider world, in which you have a lot at stake, whether it is energy security, economic security. For India, there is people. A lot of our Indians who reside in that part of the world. So I think everyone is fearing an escalation. But at the moment, I think both Israel and Iran have decided to take a step back from the escalation that we saw a few days back, and perhaps now it's back to the proxies. So we will see how these proxies react and what Israel's reaction is going to be, and whether Iran is tempted once again to join the fray directly. But as of now, it seems that some equilibrium has been established in the Israel-Iran deterrence posture.
But do you think America has been able to weigh in on Israel? And will Israel, considering Netanyahu has a lot of domestic political pressure to stay in power, though we also saw a lot of protests against Netanyahu on the streets of Israel, is not really very popular there. But Israel's giving in to retaliation, to answering back, will this, for the moment, you think it will be only left to the proxies, and the two countries right now will take a backstage or have taken a backstage, and how much influence could America really have there?
I think the message from the Americans have been quite categorically made that that they would not be part of any further escalation. And so, while they were supporting Israel in defending itself against the Iranian missile assault, I think the message has gone out, and therefore you do see, almost an orchestrated. The sense that Iran, that Israel attacked Iran, and Iran also, with due messaging attacked Israel, and at that point when Israelis were able to protect themselves, I think the sense prevailed that perhaps something has been accomplished where further escalation has been avoided, and the American message to Israel, which was publicly delivered, I think was an important component of this understanding that any further escalation would not happen from Israeli side, and therefore, we have seen Israel being put under pressure not only from the US but also from other partners like UK and France and Europe. But I think, as you mentioned, wars are as much about the strategic mapping that countries do as they are about the domestic political compulsions that leaders face. And in this case, Netanyahu's political compulsions and the ultra-right coalition that he leads, what kind of political calculations will prevail, that will determine the outcome in more ways than one, more than perhaps what Americans may be messaging. But I think that for the moment, at least, we do see American message being delivered. And although publicly Netanyahu has stated that Israel only will decide what course it would take, but I think privately you do see some peddling back of direct confrontation with Iran. But
Okay.
of course,
But
with so many proxies around, it's very difficult to say how this might eventually pan out.
so in a way, it's kind of good news on that front that for now the two countries are not engaging in direct confrontation, and America has been able to control a bit of that. But what about the Russia-Ukraine war? The American House Congress has finally voted in favor of Zelensky to give more support to Zelensky, and a $61 billion aid package has been given to Ukraine. Of course, there has been a very critical statement that has come out from Putin's close associates. But what does this aid package really do to the Ukraine-Russia war? It will definitely, I mean, the aid package includes missiles, air defense system. It will give more weapons to Ukraine and replenish the depleted supplies. So now this, how will this impact? What difference could it make in trying to stem the Russian advances there?
It's very difficult to say what impact this is going to have on the ground, but certainly I think in terms of just the morale of Ukrainian soldiers and Ukrainian leaders, that was really going down because of this very visible sense that US is now there is a war fatigue in the U.S. vis-a-vis Ukraine, and the kind of debates that we saw in U.S. Congress within the Republican Party in particular about supporting Ukraine, I think would have raised a lot of red flags in Ukraine and also in large parts of Eastern Europe, which is equally worried about the consequences post Ukraine as far as Russia is concerned. So I think in some ways what this aid package and the passage of this aid package and although it has been celebrated as a bipartisan effort, it is really not. You have a very small group of Republicans that managed to corral through that support with the speaker, the Republican speaker Johnson, managed to get some support, although his own position now is pretty precarious in the US. But I think it exposed the fundamental fault line today within the US polity, where you do see a lot of MAGA Republicans, devoted to Trump, a Trumpian idea of what American foreign policy should look like, taking a step back and trying to argue that, look, Ukraine is not a vital interest of the US. So I think while the aid package has been passed and it is good news for the moment for Ukraine as it is fighting a very, very difficult battle and the Russians are advancing on multiple fronts, and Russia, of course, has a very strong capacity to continue to fight this war, unlike Ukraine. I think for the moment Ukraine will be reassured, and of course the NATO and European Union both have welcomed the support. But I think it also tells us the story about what is the long term, what is the fundamental long term vulnerability that Ukraine is facing, which is that American domestic polity is getting divided on this question of what to do with Ukraine. And therefore, both Ukraine, Europe, as well as Biden administration will have to take a call as to how they want to execute this war going forward, because the political support at the moment in America is not as strong as perhaps it should be at this juncture, which raises significant questions about both the strategy and the tactics that are operable in this war.
Okay, so there are questions on the strategy and the tactics in this war, and the American politics is also divided here. Now, Harsh, if we move closer home and look at India's neighborhood, two very significant developments have happened. First of all, there is the election in Maldives, and we've seen that India recently had a clash. I mean, not really a clash, but there has been an escalation of tension between India and Maldives, a war of words. Also, India has supplied the BrahMos missile to Philippines. So one by one, if we look at these, as far as Maldives is concerned, there are many headlines which have been saying and talking about that China is the winner in Maldives election. And this is a boost for Muizzu. We've seen scenes from the parliament where opposition, the pro-India opposition clashed with the government, those in power. But right now, there has been a decisive victory, 71 of 93 seats. That's what Muizzu has got, and that has strengthened his position. So this victory also signifies a pivotal shift in the regional dynamics there, other than giving boost to Muizzu. And what is at stake for India? How does it impact India and its relation with Maldives?
I think India would be concerned and concerned not because I would say that this is, as media tends to portray it, a win for China or loss for India. I mean, these are all circular things. They happen. Sometimes you will get leadership in our neighboring countries which would be favorably disposed to India. Sometimes you would get antagonistic leadership in those countries, and you would have to, I think, Indian policymakers, India and New Delhi, will have to live with it as they happen. But I think the real issue here is what does President Muizu learn from this victory? What is his takeaway from this victory? If he believes that this is a vindication of his anti-India stance that he has taken, excuse me, and the kind of public posturing that he has done around India-related issues, whether it is related to a small contingent of Indian troops helping Maldives, or whether it is related to a bilateral relationship, etc. Uh, uh, then I think he might just double down on that. If he feels that this is something that is popular, that this gives him democratic vindication, then I think we are for troubled times ahead, because both now with this with no legislative control over his decisions.
Yes.
He may
Mhm.
just go all out. But of course, we have also heard President Moinzu making some, more of conciliatory statements in the past few weeks, where he had said about, for example, economic aid, etc., realizing that he would need India. If he tends to learn the lesson that, look, India will have to be balanced and India will have to be managed, then I think he will have to adjust his foreign policy accordingly. But again, I think given that he has won this massive mandate at this point, there would be a lot of concern in New Delhi that this might lead to a very turbulent phase in India Maldives relations. And
It
again,
could.
given how
Mhm.
important
Hmm.
Maldives is for Indian foreign policy and strategically, yeah, it would be a setback. But also equally, it would be a setback for India Maldives relations, which are dependent on people to people ties. We have had such productive relations between the two nations that I think for any leader to come in and try to dismantle that kind of an arrangement would really, I think, be would really create lots of problems, not only for India but also for Maldives, given how economically integrated and how socially integrated both nations are.
Absolutely. This clearly, because Muizu's whole campaign was actually based on the India Out campaign and the reduction in the presence of the Indian military personnel there. And also, a lot of contracts have been awarded to the Chinese firms. So there is clearly a realignment of the Maldivian foreign policy that we see here. But at the same time, India has strengthened its ties with Philippines. It has delivered the first batch of BrahMos missiles to Philippines. 3 batteries probably have gone, and the fourth is also on its way. Now, that also talks of the India-Philippine relationship. It also gives a boost to the defense exports, but at the same time, South China Sea and the trouble in that area because of the Chinese aggression and the clash between China and Philippines. In that context, how do we see this as opposed to Philippines also?
See, it's very interesting. You have on one hand this story about China's rise in the Indian Ocean with Maldives, and China's growing profile in the Maldives. On the other hand, you have India also trying to make a case for its own relevance, its own profile, its own salience in China's periphery. So I think it tells you the story of how Sino-Indian competition is going to stay with us for a while. It will be there as two powers in the Indo-Pacific rise and butt against each other. There's going to be increasingly this sense that in India that look, if China can have strong relations with countries in India's neighborhood, then India will also try to do the same in China's neighborhood. And India, Delhi, Manila ties, which have been growing in recent months, is a good example. We have had extremely interesting and important ties, and the fact that BrahMos has been now the deal is getting operationalized is a sign of not only I think that India's ties with Philippines are expanding, but also how India can now, with a certain degree of credibility, underscore its role as a net security provider in the region, as a critical defense partner to a number of countries that are wary of this US China contestation that is beginning to shape up the Indo Pacific and particularly Southeast Asia. So I think this is a story of India's own profile in that part of the world rising. It is also, I think, it also underscores how India's defense manufacturing base is coming into its own in some ways now with these big ticket items being exported. But I think fundamentally what is also intriguing and interesting, Naghma, is also what it says about the larger global balance of power. Look, here India is supplying weapons to Manila, which is a U.S. ally. And India is supplying these weapons, which are being produced in partnership with Russia. So this is a joint venture between
Yes.
India and Russia. Now,
Mhm.
Russia is a very important partner of China. So if you look at these strange equations that are being built up in the region, it tells you also how fluid the geopolitical environment is and how India is in a very unique position that can navigate some of these very convoluted trends in global politics. Not many countries can do that.
Absolutely. That's a really interesting point that you made there. Very strange geopolitical trends that we see. And it talks of India's unique position as well. So thank you so much for that analysis, Harsh. That's all that we have time for on this episode of the Ideas Factory. Thank you all for watching.